Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Bakari Lumumba, back once again, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we can gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. Back with another riveting and hopefully intellectually stimulating conversation where we're going to be discussing what are the core tenets of critical race theory and why they matter. But before we do that, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button, as well as the notification bell. Subscribe, like, share. Y'all know what it is. We're going to have a great conversation. The link should be in the description. If it's not, let me know and I'll make sure I put it in the chat. But we're going to have a great conversation. Apologize. I pushed this back. I think I was supposed to originally do this video have this conversation on Monday. But as you all know, I am a doctoral student. And so there have been have other responsibilities I have to tend to. As you all know, it's the end of the semester. So presentations, papers, things of that nature. So I had to push this back because I had to take care of business. But we're here now and we're going to have a conversation. As you all know, I always go over the ground rules. So the ground rules are as follows: facts over feelings. As I always state, facts over feelings when we're having a conversation, intellectually stimulating, riveting dialogue. I would rather it not be a debate, but a dialogue here at Lumumba Speaks. Number two, you cannot use any racial epithet to, of course, describe a Black person, irrespective of their geopolitical location or place of origin. And then, of course, number three, and I push this, you cannot make a claim that is patently false. I don't allow individuals to do that in any way, shape, or form, irrespective of who you are, what your identity is, what your political views are. You can't come on my platform and, of course, make a claim that is patently false for a number of reasons. Number one, it undermines my platform as someone who is, of course, a budgeting scholar, to allow someone to come on my platform and disseminate information that, of course, is patently false. I don't believe in, I think our people for a litany of years, right, for generations actually, have been oftentimes the victims of misinformation, right? And I would always argue that oftentimes individuals are promoting misinformation for nefarious reasons, oftentimes because they're seeking to manipulate individuals for some reason or the other. So we don't want to do that, but we're going to have a riveting conversation. So just make sure those ground rules, I always put that in there: facts over feelings, no racial epithets, and of course, you can't make claims that are patently false. But other than that, I think we're going to have a great conversation. As you all know, critical race theory has been in the news for quite some time. About 2 years ago, there was a big push to cancel the teaching of critical race theory in secondary education. Now, I think this was really a solution in search of a problem, because the reality of the situation is that critical race theory not only was not being taught in K through 12, but had never been taught in K through 12. In fact, you could even go to college and never learn about critical race theory. Typically, critical race theory is taught in law school as well as in graduate school. So this whole push and idea of trying to prevent children from learning about critical race theory, I think has some underlying undertones. There's a purpose behind that, and I think we would get into that. But many people would argue, particularly on the right, they make their argument that critical race theory is teaching people to hate America. We know oftentimes, unfortunately, we talk to conservatives, whenever you teach people the true history of this country, the true history of how many of these institutions were built, the fact that settler colonialism, genocide, and of course the slavery of Black bodies, the enslavement of Black bodies is how America came to be the nation that it is today. Many individuals would then take umbrage with that and say, "You're trying to teach me to hate America." And when I would argue that that's a visceral emotional reaction that's used oftentimes to move the goalpost and put the focus on an issue that's not being discussed. So I think that's one issue. But I'm gonna put the link in the chat, so please feel free, as you all know, to tap in. Share your thoughts. We're going to have, hopefully, a robust conversation. The other issue I think that is also very important to this is, I think it's important that people realize that the first core tenet of critical race theory, right, is that race is not biological. It is a social construct. I'm going to say that one more time. The first core tenet of critical race theory is that race is it's not biological. It is a social construct. So oftentimes when you hear individuals, particularly on the right, and I'm not caping for people on the left, right? But just making it plain. oftentimes the argument that they will make is that they're teaching people that if you are of a particular race, as a result of your racial, ethnic background or identity, you're stuck in a racial caste system, so on and so forth. Now, there's an argument that yes, this is true. As you all can see, I have Isabella Wilkerson's brilliant book behind me, Caste. Let's see here, where is it? Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, where she really focuses on a history of caste systems in the world and how they've been codified by the legal system. And she speaks of course, in America, I believe India, and as well as Nazi Germany as well. So you may want to check this out as well. Caste, once again, by Isabella Wilkerson. Well, with that being said, once again, the first core tenet of critical race theory is that race is a social construct and is not rooted in biology. So I think that's number one, is very important. The second core tenet of critical race theory is this concept of interest convergence. And this is one that is very near and dear to me, because interest convergence makes the argument that whenever the white power structure has engaged in any kind of racial progress, it is due to what? The fact that on its face, it looks like it benefits Black people. But of course, at the deeper level, it benefits whites. And so we're going to really get into that. I want some people to tap in because I would love to have a conversation about particularly interest convergence in terms of the greater scheme of critical race theory. Last but not least, many people may be arguing or want to know, how did critical race theory even turn into a theory, right? And this came out of the 60s and 70s. Many activists, lawyers and legal scholars were disenchanted with the lack of progress, or really retrenchment, that they found taking place after the Civil Rights and Black Power movement. As we know, unfortunately, the Black past teaches us that whenever there's been real or even perceived racial progress, not only for Black people in America, but Black people, African people throughout the world, it's been followed by periods of racial retrenchment. And so when they saw these retrenchment initiatives taking place, particularly in the 70s, it sparked some scholarly conversations. And as a result, there was a development of what is now known as critical race theory. Derek Bell, who of course was the first Black man to be, if I remember correctly, editor of the Harvard Law Review, is one of the progenitors, of course, of critical race theory. So also, if you all want to actually do some reading on critical race theory, this is my personal book. I think you could check this out. I think you could get it on Amazon for about $3 or $4. Critical Race Theory, an introduction. And it gives us an overview from beginning to end of what critical race theory is, what critical race theory is not. So been around since the 60s and only recently being discussed publicly. Sister Kelly is stating, so it's been around since the 60s and only recently been discussed publicly. Yes, this is true. Part of the reason for that is due to the fact that critical race theory typically is only taught at the graduate level, right? So you have to be at least a master's student or in law school, right? So this isn't something that you're going to get if you're just a regular undergraduate at an institution. This isn't something that you're going to get K through 12, right? So once again, as I stated, when you look at individuals on the right and how they took umbrage with critical race theory, in my opinion, is simply a solution in search of a problem. We've seen numerous situations in which we've had individuals come on public platforms and speak ill of critical race theory, even though they didn't actually know what critical race theory was. They didn't know what the core tenets were. They started to know this was a situation, in my humble opinion, in which they simply were towing the party line. The Republican Party said critical race theory is bad. So you had a lot of Black people who were Black Republicans or even Republican sympathizers, Republican leaning, take umbrage with it as well. So I think anyone who actually is a fan of history, a fan of reading compelling literature, particularly at the scholarly level, I think, and someone who actually is a fan of reading and learning the truth, I think critical race theory may be right up your alley. It may be your cup of tea. So I think that's one issue. But second, we're going to go back to interest convergence. So as I said before, the second core tenet of critical race theory is interest convergence. And this focuses on the concept that, once again, on its face, it argues that when the white power structure, whenever they engage in any type of civil rights action or initiative, on its face, it looks like it's going to benefit us, but at a deeper level, it actually benefits them in the long run. So I'm going to give a couple of examples. First and foremost, Derek Bell made a rather provocative statement when he said that the Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court ruling was not due to the great legal work of one Thurgood Marshall and, of course, their legal team, NAACP's legal team. He argued that it was due to the fact that there were international factors at play, particularly the Cold War and the pressure that was being put on the United States by the Soviet Union at the time, highlighting the fact that America was not the global progenitor of democracy that it stated that it was. And so as a result, people took umbrage with that. You're taking away from the movement and everything that we did, yada, yada, yada. But he stood firm, and we later found out due to the Freedom of Information Act that was true. There were cables being sent to the State Department by CIA agents on the ground in Africa, on the ground in Asia, on the ground in Latin America, stating we're going to have to change some of these laws if we're going to be able to make inroads in many of these former colonized nations and be able to have access to their resources. So that's an example of interest convergence. I'm going to give an example of interest convergence in higher education as well. In higher education, we know that for 200 years, higher education, like most institutions in America, was segregated. You had HBCUs and you had HWIs, right? Historically white institutions. Some people call them predominantly white institutions. And so as a result, what we ended up finding was there was a push. Civil rights movement, Black Power movement, you had the anti-war movement, you had the free speech movement. There was a push for integrating higher education institutions. However, that white institutions pushed against that until, guess what happened? They suffered defeats on the gridiron and the basketball court. So I give you some examples of what we're talking about. September 1971, University of Southern California marched into Legion Field in Birmingham, Alabama, and whipped the University of Alabama's all-white football team. USC had a racially integrated, predominantly Black football team, and they beat them 42-21. Sam Cunningham, who was a star running back for the USC Trojans, had 11 carries for 135 yards and 3 touchdowns. This caused Bear Bryant, who was an ardent racist, to start recruiting Black players. In basketball, I think it was 1966, you had the University of Texas Western, now known as UTEP, University of Texas El Paso, defeat the all-white University of Kentucky basketball team for the NCAA basketball championship. Their coach at the time was Adolph Rupp. He was a racist. As a result of them losing to predominantly Black basketball and football teams, white institutions started recruiting Black players. So for many people say, hey, this is a watershed moment in the fight for civil rights, equality, equal access, so on and so forth. However, once again, interest convergence creeped up again. And as a result, what we found is subsequent generations later, HBCUs are struggling financially, and white institutions were able to parlay recruiting Black athletes to controlling, once again, the Black athletic talent, the raw material, and parlaying that into billion-dollar TV contracts, right? And so once again, we see on its face is benefiting us, but if you dig a little deeper and look at the long-term benefits, right? So that's a great example of interest convergence. Another core theory of critical race theory is anti-essentialism. We know, unfortunately, under a system of racism and white supremacy, there's a belief that individuals have certain racial ethnic groups have certain innate talents and abilities, or some would even say disabilities, right? And this goes to scientific racism, the belief that Black people aren't as intelligent or smart as other racial ethnic groups, that we even know issues such as scientific sexism. So when we look back, there was a time in which women were prohibited from, of course, pursuing higher education. And one of the arguments that they made was rooted in scientific sexism, that the women, if they actually read and studied and wrote literature and so on and so forth, the blood would go to the brain rather to their actual sexual reproductive organs. And as a result, they wouldn't be able to have children. Absolutely ridiculous, but this was the prevailing thought of the day, particularly in the 19th century. So those are some of the core concepts of critical race theory. Want you all to tap in, the link is in the chat, and then we can have a great conversation about what do you think of these core concepts, and of course, why they matter. Another core concept of critical race theory, of course, is the critique of liberalism. Oftentimes, they argue that many civil rights initiatives are being promoted, subsidized, and even led by liberal whites. And so that oftentimes the issues they address is a surface level type of push that and focus that they have. And then next thing you know, they're on to saving whales, free willy, things of that nature. So these are some of the core um, uh, tenets of critical race theory. And so I think anyone who's actually knowledgeable of what the core tenets of critical race theory is, or I don't see how someone could take umbrage with the actual theory itself, unless someone was simply, like I said before, uh, searching for a problem. They have a solution and searching for problems. So once again, the link is in the chat. As you all know, you do not have to cam up to be part of the conversation, and you do not have to use your actual name. You could use a pseudonym if you want to tap in and be part of the conversation. So definitely want to have a robust conversation regarding what are the core tenets of critical race theory and why they matter. As I stated before, I have a book here. You can probably get this book for $4 or $5 on Amazon, Critical Race Theory, an Introduction. I purchased this book about 4 or 5 years ago, right? So, and another thing that most people may be unaware about when it comes to critical race theory is there's been a number of racialized crits that have come out. So now we have Latin crit that focuses on critical race theory from a Latino perspective, a Latinx perspective. We have tribal crit that focuses on critical race theory from an indigenous people's perspective. We have even Black crit, right, that focuses on critical race theory from a Black perspective, particularly looking at and examining and deconstructing anti-Black racism and anti-Blackness. So critical race theory is about that life, for lack of better words. So once again, the link is in the chat. Let's have a great conversation. And we can even open up the conversation and even touch on maybe a couple current events. We know there's an unfortunate situation that took place with a sister down in Mexico where she unfortunately lost her life in a nonsensical manner. And then we maybe can even open it up a little bit because I've heard that Kyrie Irving actually donated to that sister's GoFundMe. So definitely want to have a robust conversation regarding critical race theory. You could tap in, even share what are your thoughts on critical race theory? What did you know about critical race theory before, of course, this broadcast? And then, of course, what are your thoughts now that I've shared many of the core tenets of critical race theory? So the link is in the chat. Tap in, be part of the conversation with seeking to have a robust conversation regarding what are the core tenets of critical race theory and why they matter. As I said before, the link is in the chat. The link should also be in the description. So don't leave me hanging out here, y'all. Don't leave me hanging. It's been a long week. As you all know, I'm a doctoral student. So I had a lot of work that I had to complete this week. That's why I pushed this back to Saturday. But hey, I'm here now. We're grinding. Of course, we're going to make it happen. So definitely tap in, be part of the conversation. Want to get you all's thoughts on critical race theory. And I guess we can even open this up because this is a comment that people have had regarding would you want critical race theory to be taught to your children in K through 12, right? So we know oftentimes you only learn about critical race theory in graduate school or law school. And that is even it's dependent on your major. So if you're in graduate school and you're studying biology, getting a master's in biology or chemistry, you're not going to know what critical race theory is. You're not going to hear about it. So tap in, be part of the conversation. Definitely want to get you all's perspectives on critical race theory. What are your thoughts regarding the core tenets that I reviewed? And then, of course, we can open the conversation up to looking at some current or contemporary events that's taking place in the Black world. So once again, we're talking about critical race theory. Some of the core tenets of critical race theory. Number one is anti-essentialism, the belief that a person does not have innate behavioral characteristics simply based on their race. Even though many individuals argue that critical race theory promotes essentialism, that is not the case whatsoever. Of course, there's a critique of liberalism, particularly white paternalistic liberalism that we know tends to always rear its ugly head in Black social movements. This concept of legal storytelling, telling the stories of Black people, telling the stories of people of color, and they experience this indie legal system that many people argue and call the carceral state to this day. And then, of course, there is interest convergence, right? Interest convergence is the belief that the white power structure and white people as a whole do not engage in what civil rights type of actions or initiatives until it actually benefits them. Another core tenet of critical race theory, and I forgot to mention this, I would be remiss in my duty if I don't mention this, is the belief that racism is not an aberration. It is normal, it is endemic, and it is a part of the culture, is a core foundation of the culture in America due to what it being rooted in settler colonialism, the genocide of indigenous peoples, and of course the enslavement of African peoples here in America. And then, of course, last but not least, first core tenet is that race is a social construct, not a biological reality, right? So those are the core tenets of critical race theory. Once again, tap in. We can have a great conversation. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. You can put them in the chat, or of course tap in and be part of the conversation. So I know it's a Saturday night, but I definitely want to have this conversation. I think this is a conversation that we needed to have regarding critical race theory, because we know there's a lot of misinformation out there. And oftentimes, unfortunately, if you don't go get the information for itself, as our parents would say, if you don't get it from the horse's mouth, then oftentimes you could be led astray. I know I was on another brother's platform, Sister Kelly, you said critical race theory doesn't seem much of a theory. Could you extrapolate? I don't know exactly what you mean by that. Matter of fact, Sister Kelly, you've been on here. You are a great supporter of my channel. Appreciate you. Thank you for being here once again. But tap in, be part of the conversation. As you know, you do not have to cam up. I remember you, sister, you said you're calling out of Fort Wayne. So appreciate you holding it down all the way in Indiana, the Hoosier state. But if you could tap in, that way, I could definitely get a better understanding of what you mean by it doesn't seem as much of a theory. And then we could get the conversation, the ball rocking. But once again, as I stated before, most individuals have their own different perspectives. Okay, so it seems like the truth as opposed to a theory. Yes, however, in the higher ed, typically you find situations as being theoretical, right? So when people say that racism isn't an aberration, it's normal, it's endemic to American society, we would argue, yes, absolutely. But then other individuals that would say, no, that's not the case. So this is why they argue that it's more so a theory rather than just stating facts, right? And then you have to support that theory with underlying evidence, which they do. So, Brother Ghost, what's the word?
Hey, what's going on? Can you hear me?
I'm doing quite all right. I can hear you just fine.
Okay, got you. I'm kind of hearing like playback. Are you hearing an echo?
I'm not hearing the echo on my end.
Okay.
Zongo native, peace, brother. Appreciate you tapping in. But a Ghost, go right ahead.
So I tapped in about 10 minutes in, so I was just kind of listening to your explanation. To answer one of your questions, I didn't really know anything. I just saw it as like an argument on social media about, whether it should be approved. I heard some different opinions on yes or no, but yeah, I didn't really know too much about it, so I was kind of listening to your explanation of some of the core tenets. I think I got a decent idea, at least from some of the things that you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it sounds like from your perspective, and it all makes sense to me. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like something that definitely should be available based on what little I heard from you. So yeah, no, I think it's a good thing. I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're basically saying is like it wouldn't really be studied anywhere below like the higher academic level, right? Like college
Correct.
level.
But yeah, I mean, to this day, you only learn about critical race theory if you go to graduate school or law school, right? I mean, that's the only time you're going to hear about critical race theory. So, I mean, I didn't hear about, well, I learned about critical race theory when I was an undergrad, but that's because my major was Black Studies, right? And so some of the preeminent contributors and progenitors of critical race theory were Black scholars like Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw. Intersectionality, of course, was a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. Intersectionality is a core tenet of critical race theory. That's the argument that individuals have a number of different identities, right? from being a father to being a man to being heterosexual. And I'm just speaking of myself, right? And so as a result, individuals may face discrimination from the multitude of those different identities. So some of the examples Kimberly Crenshaw would give. So if you're a Black woman, you could face discrimination for not only being a woman, which is considered a minority in America, but also for being Black. And then if you're a lesbian, you could face discrimination for being what a member of the LGBTQ community, or if you have a disability. So then you have 4 different identities and you're being discriminated regarding all of them, right? So these are some of the examples that Kimberly Crenshaw gives when she talks about one of the core tenets of critical race theory and it being what intersectionality. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, it makes sense. You probably have to ask me some, questions or anything. I don't, because like I said,
Okay.
I'm not too
All right.
educated on this topic. So,
Gotcha. That's all good.
yeah.
So, and that's one of the reasons why I asked, well, what are you? So you mentioned that the only thing you really learned about critical race theory is due to the debates you saw going on social media. So
Right.
in those debates, what is it that you were hearing? What is it that you were able to ascertain? What did you learn from those debates?
Okay, yeah. So not much. I mean, I could tell that it was kind of an argument that a lot of people were speaking. Like I heard basically your argument, and then I heard sort of the conservative argument that you touched on
Mm-hmm.
basically. And what I heard from like your angle was just like what you said, as far as like a lot of people, academics kind of saying that, it's not something that would be studied at a certain level and blah blah blah. And I just
Mm-hmm.
never really tapped too deep into it because it's not, something that I've studied or knew much about, and I was a little bit I didn't really know if it was, like, the main primary concern, at least of mine, but so I kinda saw it as, like, one of those things where it's just, one of these things that d people kinda pick to argue about as far as Democrats and Republicans, and, I feel like there's just some conversations and topics right now, especially within the last, like, 4 years or so
Mm-hmm.
approximately, where people just kinda argue about different topics, and I'm not really since that's not really I'm not really caping for either side like that pretty much, so I didn't really know if it was something to dig deep into. It sounds like it does have some more benefit to us, based on listening to you than what
Mm-hmm.
I understood, but, at the time, I didn't know that, of course, so I'm just reading and I'm just thinking like, "Okay, it's just" basically what I saw from it was like, okay, it's basically like a historical examination sort of something, and, it's like, um, I don't know, just not something I was seeing as being worth, really digging too deep into at the time. But and then from the conservative side, I remember and I'm trying to figure out who this was, but did you see that video? I think it was in Chicago, I want to say, where the black guy came into the school or the PTA meeting and he was like
Mm-hmm.
complaining about it. Who
Yeah,
was that? Do
I
you
saw the
remember who
video.
that was?
Yeah, it went viral. Yeah.
Yeah, who was that? Was he
I
somebody?
don't
Wasn't
know,
he
but
like?
he was a Black conservative, and I think he even made his rounds on a lot of the talk shows,
Mm,
conservative talk shows, conservative media, where he was speaking ill of, I don't want my son being taught to hate America, and that's typically what they do. When most people on both sides, when they don't have a cogent argument that they can make, they just come out and say, "Oh man, the reality they're just trying to teach us hate," rather than just you just telling the truth, right? So I think that's an issue. Kelly says maybe it shouldn't be behind an academic paywall. And by this, I'm sure you're referring to critical race theory. So I would say yes and no. One, in academia, in order to learn something, you have to pay for the class, and then of course attend the course. But the other issue is, like I stated, you could go online and buy a book on critical race theory for like $5 on Amazon, right? So that's another way which you can actually usurp that academic paywall. So Zongo Native says, as an African in America, I must admit that this topic is completely alien to me. Never heard of it when I was in Ghana. Well, I think there's a reason for that. Critical race theory, of course, is a American-centered theory, right? So it's not global in nature. Black critical theory tends to have more of an international perspective when looking at the Black community globally. But from a critical race perspective, it's only looking at the issue of race in America. As we know, depending on where you live in the world, race is codified differently. So if you're in the Dominican Republic, if you're in South Africa, if you're in Papua New Guinea, if you're in Australia, if you're in Bangladesh, things may be different. So that's the reason why it's an American-centered theory. So With that being said, so but go ahead, brother Ghost.
Yeah, no, but so that was kind of what I heard. I was just hearing some of his arguments, but basically the conservative arguments didn't seem to be well fleshed out. It kind of just seemed to be like what you said. It was like there is no legitimate reason. It's just kind of like we don't want to discuss it. I think from the black conservative perspective, it was just one of those things where, people were they're just trying to toe the line of the company
Absolutely,
line,
yeah.
basically party line. So,
Mhm.
I didn't really hear any like thought out arguments
Right.
necessarily. And like I said, to be fair, I didn't really look that deep into either side because I didn't really see the value and I don't know, but yeah, that's pretty much what I knew and
Okay.
what I saw.
Not bad at all. Not, and I mean, it's one of those things that tends to take place. So you just have to be cognizant of that, and then of course move forward. But I always push people to make sure that they're getting it from the horse's mouth. You have to read the literature yourself to be able to draw on your own make your own draw your own conclusions. I even know there's some conservative site where they made a video dissing Howard Zinn. So many of you may be unaware of who Howard Zinn is. Golly, why is it every time I'm going to pull out a book? I've never, yeah, I might have to do something about this because every time I'm ready to pull out a book, I can't find a book. Then as soon as the show was over, I could find a book. But Howard Zinn, he was a considered a radical historian. I'm gonna get to you back 761. Make sure you tap in, be part of the conversation, brother. He wrote a book called The People's History of America from 1492 to the present. And so in the book, he argues that the history of the United States, particularly in K through 12 education, is taught from a perspective in which it glorifies the nation. So it's nationalistic in nature, and it doesn't focus on the actual lives and experiences of the actual citizens that lived the history, right? And so as a result, he talks about the genocide of indigenous peoples. He talks about the racial caste system, and the, of course, enslavement of African people in America. And he goes on into how women have been discriminated against, denied suffrage, and so on and so forth. And so as a result, they argue that he was trying to teach people to hate America. So that's just kind of what they do. But like I said, you have to be someone who isn't easily manipulated and able to read and ascertain information for yourself and then draw your own conclusions. So that's a real issue. So Bag 761 says, instead of critical race theory, Americans assess the accomplishments and contributions of African Americans have contributed to this country. So, I'm actually going to, I'm going to say I agree and disagree, right? And so first and foremost, I think critical race theory is important, right? Because it gives you a background, a different perspective to look at America, how it's developed, and how America's institutions are ran, right? Many people argue, how has white supremacy been able to have such long-lasting staying power? And one of the arguments that I make is that because white supremacy, has been institutionalized, right? It's been institutionalized in government, it's been institutionalized in the schools, so on and so forth. The second issue is that I wouldn't want America teaching about the contributions of Black people. And the reason why is because we know whenever the power structure teaches about Black people, they teach it in a manner in which they only focus on individuals that have done things that to them is acceptable. Or if they're resisting, it has to be in a manner that the power structure finds acceptable. So for me, I would never want the power structure to be in a position to actually disseminate information about who we are and what we have accomplished. I understand where you're coming from, but that's just for me. I believe in self-determination, and as we know, as a Pan-Africanist, what is to be done for African people should be done by African people. All right. So tonight, M says, peace. All I learned from CRT, from TV, is teaching this will make little white children sad. Why will they say that? So hey, you got to tap in and be part of the conversation. So one of the reasons I would argue they say that is because they teach them the truth about white racism in America. They teach them the truth about the history of white racism, right? They teach them the truth that America was founded on settler colonialism, the genocide of indigenous peoples, and last but not least, the enslavement of African peoples, right? And that the basis of America is built on that. It's not built on Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. It's not built on the fact that George Washington never told a lie and the truth goes marching on. It's not built on this ridiculous belief of religious freedom, right? It's actually rooted in, of course, settler colonialism, the genocide of indigenous peoples, and of course, the othering and enslavement of African people. And so this is also an issue that we tend to find that whenever racial issues are brought to the forefront, you tend to find white people or racist white people engaging in behaviors that make them a victim. So there's an actual term for this. It's called white fragility. So yes, I actually have a book on this called White Fragility. I'm gonna put this in the chat. This is so there's an actual term for it. It's called white fragility. And so basically what this talks about is, and I actually met the woman who wrote this book. So yes, the term is called white fragility. And what tends to take place is that when this happens, right, when white people are confronted regarding their racism, bigotry, so on and so forth, what they do is they find a way to turn the tables and become a victim, right? So that's the issue. So Go says we get little information about Black contributions, but not much in school. This is true. We know Dr. Carter G. Woodson stated that one of the major issues that we have as a people is the miseducation of Black people. And we see that still taking place today. I think the other issue is even in Black schools, as he states in his seminal text that was written over 80 years ago, even in Black schools, this is taking place. And I think part of the issue is because we have Black teachers and Black administrators who are not Black-minded, right? And so anytime we want to educate our youth, educate subsequent generations of Black children, we have to have institutional agents and institutions that are Black-minded, right? I even would argue freedom-minded, right? So that's the issue. So yes, white fragility is the term that's used, that when you tend to focus on racialized issues, you find white people saying, oh, this is going to make my child cry. I don't feel comfortable. They make themselves the center of attention. It's due to what this term called white fragility. So once again, it's a good read. I think if you ever get a chance to check out the book and read the book, I've read it. It's a great read if you really want to deconstruct and dissect why this is done, right? But the major issue, the central thesis she's making is that they don't want to confront their own racism and bigotry. And so the key thing to do is to make themselves be the victim. We know oftentimes in conservative circles, one of the major talking points is that liberals believe everyone are victims. Black people want to be victims. But the reality is, if you actually go into those conservative circles, those conservative talking points, and even in white supremacist circles, they're the ones who believe they are victims, right? You talk about the oath keepers. You talk about the skinheads, the Aryan Nation, who have the 3 thunderbolts on their arms. They believe that they're being discriminated against. So everyone is making a claim that they're the victim and the other person is not. So we tend to find this on either side of the aisle. But I'm going to open it back up once again for conversation. I'm going to put the link in the chat one more time. And please tap in and be part of the conversation. So Zongo Native is saying, isn't education supposed to begin at home first, which is from your parents? Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. As you know, the African proverb states what? The ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people, right? Not in the schools, not in the social institutions, not at the rec center, not at the block party, not at the house party, but in the home. And so I think that's the major issue, right? I know that my parents put a book in my hand when I was still a toddler, and that's what allowed me to develop a voracious love of reading and of being intellectually curious. We know, unfortunately, that does not happen oftentimes. And we know that, unfortunately, more often than not, we find our institutional agents at institutions of not only higher education, but even secondary education, in situations where they're almost being a parent, right? And so that's a conversation for another day. I'll probably do a show on that. But once again, we're going to focus on critical race theory and, of course, Black education. But the link is in the chat. As I stated before, we can open the conversation up a little bit so it doesn't have to be only centered on critical race theory. As you know, you do not have to cam up. You do not have to use your real name. You could use a pseudonym. But I definitely want to get some of the sisters in and have a conversation. Like I said, we could open this conversation up to Black education. And as we know, Dr. Amos Wilson teaches us that the true function of an education is to secure the survival of its people. So tap in. I put the link in the chat one more time. It should also be in the description. We know we got a good amount of people here in the room, so I want you to make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. We're having a robust conversation regarding what are the core tenets of critical race theory and why they matter. Then, of course, we're going to extrapolate that out to, of course, Black education. So Brother Ghost says why we don't all have parents or parents who are equipped to educate us in the U.S. This is true. This is true. So that's a major issue as well. But once again, the link is in the chat. Let's have a great conversation, y'all. We had a new commenter. What was it? Tonight M. Love for you to tap in, be part of the conversation. I think you are a new viewer, and I appreciate you coming in. So definitely. So critical race theory. What are you all thoughts on interest convergence, right? Interest convergence for me is my favorite core tenet. So what are you all's thoughts on interest convergence in relation to this idea and belief that the white power structure and white people don't engage in civil rights type of action or legislation until it actually benefits them? All right. But a Ghost, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to give some people a chance to comment if they had anything, but
Okay.
yeah,
Yes,
no,
Sister
what I
Kelly,
would,
you tap in, Sister Kelly. Come on now. You may not know about critical race theory, but you can at least give your opinion on interest convergence and the belief that racism is normal and not an aberration. So you need to tap in. Go ahead, Brother Ghost.
yeah, no problem. That was an interesting term. I had actually don't think I had ever heard that term interest convergence before, but yeah, no, I definitely think so. What I would say is yeah, that's kind of aligned with the whole like, concept of powernomics or like any sort of I guess race first type of theory. It's kind of a thing to be kind of expected, unfortunately, to me, I would say, as far as that, like of course, what as I've said here on the show before, people I think people should really just study just basic American history as well, like Black people, because if you really look at it, it's like, I mean, even if you just read some of these old documents, people are always talking about it, but it's like, yeah, the country wasn't really set up with us to be, thriving and we were not, even citizens at all or even
Mm-hmm.
total human beings. So it's like, yeah, all that stuff is basically designed not to really work for us. And a lot of I think we've got confused sometimes with some of the laws changing and different things. It's like sometimes we think that it's kind of equalized us, I guess, and I don't think in all cases it always has. And yeah, I think the system is still, there's still systemic racism and stuff. And I mean, everything is not as bad as it was in the past. Don't get me wrong, there is a lot of things that have changed,
Right.
but I do think that yeah, what you're saying there, the interest convergence thing, I mean, that's definitely a thing. And the way for us to combat that, I would say, is, one, we need to understand it, and two, we kind of need to try to work within it and then sometimes maybe work without it. And it's really, to break that down further, you would have to really, because it really applies to a lot of things, it pretty much applies to almost everything. But I mean, I think if you understand how laws, policies, this and that that's being pushed is working for you or not working for you, then you can use it in your favor or not use it in your favor, if that
Could
makes
you give
sense.
an example?
Yeah, let me try to because I don't want to be just throwing things off the cuff, but let me see. Give me 1 second here. Let me think of something good. Um
Sister Kelly
Shoot,
Brown
okay.
Sugar and tapped in. Appreciate you,
Oh,
sister.
there we go. Well, never mind. If she wants to speak, let her go.
I is it on? I've never.
Yes,
Okay, I guess it
yes,
is.
we can hear you just fine.
There is one thing. Um, I think that the teaching of CRT will run into and cause white people to feel aggressed and taken aback by it, it depends on who's teaching it. If you have a black female or even a black male teaching a class of white students, CRT, naturally, they're going to feel some type of way. So I'm not even sure, listening to the tenets, it doesn't seem arguable. It doesn't seem like there's anything wrong with it. It's common knowledge almost. It's just wrapped in.
It's common knowledge for us, you know. But I think one of the main issues, and you sound that you're an educated sister, so I'm quite sure you've been to college and university, is that with most white people, they just don't believe that there's been any racial or ethnic discrimination of any kind. They just don't believe it. Like, it would happen in front of them and they'll still be like, well, that didn't really happen the way that they said it did.
And I agree. And what more so when you have a black male teacher, particularly teaching this to a class of, let's say, high school students, there's going to be issues. Now, that doesn't mean that it should not be taught. I think it should be taught. It's debatable at what age do you teach and who's going to be the one to deliver the messages. Quite frankly, I would feel some type of way having a white female or a white male teacher teach me CRT.
Okay.
So
why is that?
It's not going to be as real for them.
Okay. But I'm just pushing back. I'm just playing devil's advocate right now. So I mean, there are some white professors that teach African American studies and do a great job. Do you not think that could be the case with critical race theory?
It's just, it's just not going to be the same. To me, okay. It's not going to be the same if it's coming from. There's a part where once they teach it so much and so often, because it's not as real for them as it would be for a black teacher.
So
it's not going to come off.
It would be similar to trying to teach a course in women's studies. I can know the information, but I don't have the lived experience. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I know that may make me sound biased or wrong, but yes.
Okay. I mean, I get it. That's why I use the women's studies example, because I've taken women's studies courses, actually minored in women's studies. But once again, even though I know this information and it helps me with raising my daughter, at the same time, I'm like, I've never actually experienced this, nor am I ever going to experience it. So Bag 761 states he takes an issue with critical race theory because it doesn't lay out the contributions of African Americans. So tap in, be part of the conversation, because I want to push back against that. And the reason why is critical race theory isn't history. It's not a theory on American history. Yes, one of the core tenets of critical race theory is revisionist history, right? Where they kind of look back at what actually happened rather than the narrative that's being promoted. But it isn't a theory of history. It's a theory of America and how America is ran. So, but tap in and be part of that conversation, Brother Bag 761. Go ahead, Sister Kelly. I apologize for cutting you off.
That's okay. Give me one moment. I lost my train of thought.
Okay. But you were talking about why you wouldn't feel comfortable with if a white person, of course, teaching critical race theory.
It's not that well, maybe there would be a little bit of discomfort, but at the same time, it just, I can't say discomfort necessarily. I don't know if I said that before. I'll take that back. Okay. It would be. I
think I said that, so that's on me for misquoting.
I would not digest it the same. Nothing can replace the enthusiasm of a teacher who's actually feeling and going through what has went through what they're teaching.
Okay, that has the lived experience. Got you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Makes sense. Makes sense. Understandable. Absolutely. Appreciate you tapping in, sister. You know, I've been getting on you past couple of weeks, but you finally tapped in. I'm great. I am extremely appreciative of you doing so.
Yeah, of course. But no, what saying that is not to necessarily bring it onto me and my feelings, because I feel that, like you said, this is not really a theory. It's true. I think anything is better than the packaged Black history that we get that skews the legacies, the messages, and the history of the Black people that we have that pose for Black History Month.
Right.
Anything's better than the narrative that we're being fed at this point.
Understood. Okay. Okay, but the bag, hey, I'm waiting on you, brother. I know you have a dissenting opinion, so definitely want to get you to tap in and be part of that conversation. Brother Ghost, any thoughts to what Sister Kelly had to say?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say, yeah, definitely thank you for, coming on and, just being another person to speak here as well as offering your opinion. I think that was a good point, that, Miss Kelly had to say. What I would say is, like I put in the chat, I do think it's about presentation as well. Because yeah, I mean, you could kind of say that about anything. Like, couldn't you say that about African American history courses that are taught in general, as well as anything related to that? But that's the way it is. I mean, we're not the numerical majority in America, and we know that we're obviously not the dominant people in society. So we're always gonna have some people, unless they outlaw it in the institutions, then or unless you go to HBCU or something. Well, even then, I think you can still have a white professor. So it's like, yeah, I
Absolutely,
mean, yeah.
absolutely. And the
So
other
there's
is,
really no way to avoid it. But
yeah.
I do, just real quick, I do want to say I do get your point, Kelly, as far as,
Mhm.
you know, it's kind of hard to hear it from somebody else, but yeah.
Yeah. But
Um,
I understand where you're coming from as well.
I do. And okay, what I wanted to finish was not to center it back on me and how Black people take the message, because we already know it. It's more about how the current criticism of CRT is being treated. I don't think it's the teaching of CRT necessarily. I think it's the fear of who's teaching it to your children.
Mm,
And for, like I said, for a Black male or female to teach this to a class of white students, these parents are going to feel like you're aggressing their student, or at least they'll center it around you aggressing their students.
right.
Yeah, I mean, either way though, they're gonna try to fight back against it. And that what you've said there, while I agree with that would be a tactic they would adopt. That doesn't, as far as I know, that's not one of the tactics they've adopted so far. And the thing is, I just think either way, they don't really want it being taught. And the reason more so is probably because one, it's just rhetoric, like I said, so they're just towing the party line, and then also two, they probably don't really want that history and those examinations of, historical events and topics and people and so on and so forth. They don't want that disseminated, because then, it's obviously going to shine certain people in a non-favorable light. So I think that's the primary thing. And then after that, you're just making up arguments basically against it, which, of course, you can find a lot of things to say.
I agree with
Absolutely.
that.
That's a great point. Great point. Great point. So yeah, so this is basically what we're looking at with why people take issue or take umbrage with, of course, critical race theory, is because it actually flips the narrative on its head, particularly of American exceptionalism, that America's done no wrong, that America's always been at the forefront and the vanguard of the push for human rights. And we know that is complete hogwash. So that's why many individuals are taking umbrage with it. I still don't know to this day why there's been such a a push against it when it's only it's only taught in what law school and in what graduate school. So I don't know where that came from, but as I stated before at the beginning of the broadcast, in my personal opinion, is simply a solution in search of a problem. And what I mean by that is oftentimes, particularly in a political context, politicians will. Has anyone, by the way, seen the movie The Spook That Sat by the Door?
No, heard of it, but not seen it.
Okay, so we're going to have to do a broadcast on The Spook That Sat by the Door. But basically what happens in the movie The Spook That Sat by the Door is this politician who's a senator is he's trying to shore up the numbers for his reelection. And so what he does is he manufactures a problem, right? And then proposes a solution. It's almost like the villains in the most movies, right? A villain would create a problem, create a catastrophe, create a situation that the world is going to come to an end, and then they're like, okay, but I'm going to be the one to solve it, right? And so this is basically what's going on here as well. So to make it seem like they're America first, that, you know, even though this isn't something most people even learn about, but it seems like, see, this is insidious energy that's trying to destroy America from within, and we have to be against this, even though this is all a figment of their imagination. But as we know, most Americans aren't well versed in these type of issues and topics. And so we know oftentimes, even like in high school or middle school, political campaigns are popularity contests. Most politicians are like American Idol superstars to most individuals, and they take what they say hook, line, and sinker, without actually looking to do what? Any research to find out what they're saying is true, and then boom, you have an entire demographic of people swayed in one particular direction regarding about an issue that they know very little or oftentimes anything about. So tonight, M said yes. What do you mean by yes? Hope you could tap in and be part of the conversation. So what is the end goal of teaching CRT? So one of the goals of critical race theory is to actually deconstruct. They argue. Well, matter of fact, let me pull this up. You all can continue the conversation. I'm gonna try to get the exact quote in terms of what critical race theory seeks to do. What is the overarching goal? So, that is a good question.
Well, I'll jump in, and one thing I wanted to say, and I did just kind of think of this off the cuff, so I wasn't really super prepared, so I might be a little wrong, but one example I would use of interest convergence, and also I wasn't even familiar with the term, but let's say one thing I was thinking of was I think about like the student debt forgiveness as possibly an example where you know the Democratic really different politicians have kind of ran on it as one of the things on the platform. And I think the interest convergence can be seen possibly a lot in a lot of the different things that they run on, especially the Democratic side. So, say for example, like they could use that to get votes, basically, specifically younger people and possibly, you know, minorities. Although I don't think a lot of minorities are really as educated on it as they probably should be, but they definitely can get some votes from younger people or people who just have a lot of student loan debt, right? So that will be an example of what they have to benefit from it. While at the same time, you know, I believe that especially as Black people, we can benefit from it because, you know, one, it'll obviously forgive debt that we have, which we have a lot. And then also, you know, others can benefit from it from those people who are getting out of debt, then pouring their money either into the Black economy specifically or the general economy, allowing them to start businesses, hire Black people, et cetera, or just help their families, et cetera. There's a lot of different things you can do from there, but that would be my example of a possible like interest convergence. Although I don't think everybody really sees all those different angles that I might have presented there, but I do think, at least from like the Democratic Party side, I do think they see it. So that would be my example.
Okay, very good, very good. Any other
That's a
thoughts?
good example.
Go
That's a
ahead,
good
sister.
example. The stimulus package can be another one. It's
Okay,
a good
Yeah,
example.
true.
elaborate.
Um, and the Black Lives Matter movement also, I'm going to argue this because money was generated for white liberal women through clicks for views on social media. And so it was fashionable and profitable to get behind the movement. That's what I wanted to add to it. So I understand your point as well, Ghost.
Okay, so can you elaborate? I don't know exactly what you mean. You said it was fashionable and profitable. Profitable for whom?
White female liberal women.
So how did they profit from the Black Lives Matter movement raising money?
Social media.
Okay, but how did they profit from it?
Clicks and views.
Oh, so you're stating that white women went on social media and they were making videos about the movement?
I do believe it would have generated profit for them to a certain degree.
Okay.
TikTok, YouTube, places like that. Then became a label to slap onto pushing beauty products. I've seen this.
Okay.
And this is just from my side, from what I've seen. Someone else might not see that, but I've seen it.
Okay, so you're stating that white women were selling and promoting beauty products as well.
I feel like the Black Lives Matter movement, it just became a hashtag that generated attention and therefore revenue through social media, ads, things of that nature.
And the reason I'm kind of pushing back is because, as you know, I like for people to be specific, really detail oriented when we're making some claims, particularly claims that are provocative and non-traditional. But the other issue is two things. One, the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black Lives Matter organization are two separate entities. So I think that's one thing we have to understand. The second issue is that I've personally seen Black Lives Matter movements in different places do some good work. So there was a good example was in Bloomington, Indiana. They were able to prevent the Bloomington Police Department from getting an armored truck. Right. So there has been some real work that has been done. So I just think that we have to look at it holistically, right? Because if in any social movement, let's say there's a social movement tomorrow for immigrants, that you may have individuals who go on and say, hey, as a result, I'm going to make videos about this and make money. But when we focus on interest convergence, we're looking at the power structure engaging in seemingly progressive racial initiatives that on the surface benefits people of color, but substantially benefits the white power structure. So I tend not to look at individuals because most individuals in America, because of the cost of living, are always trying to find a way to make a buck. If you don't believe me, go to New York City. Someone's always trying to sell you something on the street, right? But we're looking at this from an institutional, social perspective. So we're looking at institutions, we're looking at social structures. And then, of course, the law as well.
Isn't social media a pretty powerful force?
It is, however, but it doesn't enact any laws. Oh, right. So the example I gave us of interest convergence was what? The desegregation of higher education on its face was seen as a watershed moment for civil rights activists. However, what we found is that it actually, in the long run, benefited white people monetarily, because these institutions started recruiting Black athletes, and as a result of recruiting Black athletes who were the better players, they were able to get lucrative billion-dollar TV contracts. So they were able to have better laboratories, hire better professors, and then of course raise the not only academic but also athletic profile of the institution. And as a result, this didn't take place for HBCUs. So that would be an example of interest convergence at an institutional level. But I'm not saying to push back what you're saying as if it has no merit. It's just that anyone can get on social media, irrespective of their race, gender, ethnic identity, and make a video about something that's going on. So, do you understand the difference where I'm trying to differentiate?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. Brother Bag, what's the word?
How you doing, Professor Lumumba?
I'm doing all right, man. It's the end of the semester. So as I stated before, I had to push this conversation back because, you know, I had presentations I had to give, papers I had to write. So, but we're here now.
Ghost, how you doing, Ghost? Kelly, hope everybody's doing well. The on the CRT, I've just heard about it not too long ago, and to me, it's like, when are they going to get it right? They want to teach some sort of Black history in this country, and it's always controversial. And when I was talking about the contributions of our people, what I'm saying is, if they're going to tell a story, whether it's theory or history, tell the truth. I thought there were supposed to be Black scholars that were involved in writing all this or being a part of all this. And if they're going to have the critical race theory, I get it, no problem. But you can also add our contributions to it.
Well, so I'm gonna say this. So one, critical race theory is the ideological child of critical legal studies, right? And I understand what you're saying, but this isn't a theory that's rooted in history. It's a theory that's rooted in what? Legal studies. And so, and when I say that, because that would be tantamount to me studying psychology and then stating, hey, we need to be discussing the contributions of African Americans that African Americans have made to American society. So, hey, that's a great point. Those type of things need to be done, but this isn't history. This is psychology.
Yeah, it almost seems like it's just another way to keep people divided. I think it's probably a good thing the way you described it. I was kind of trying to log in, so I was missing a lot of it. And it sounded like the way you presented it, you know, it would work. It depending on, like you were saying, or Kelly was saying, who's teaching it. But man, they got to get this right. If they're going to mess with it and put it out in the public eye, you think they would have it more worked out before they start getting people all riled up.
Well, so when you say they, who are you referring to?
Who's ever involved with presenting it out, you know what I mean? Bringing it out to us, because it was advertised CRT. They want to put it into schools. They need to have it all worked out before they introduce it. I don't even know if it's in the schools yet.
So that's the issue. One,
do you know if they are or not?
So one is not. Critical race theory has never been taught in secondary education.
Do you know if they're in the schools or not? Or
it's not. It's not. Critical race theory has never been taught in secondary education. No critical race theory scholar has ever promoted or even inferred that critical race theory should be taught at the secondary level. The individuals that started promoting that type of nonsense were people who were against critical race theory. That's number one. Secondly, critical race theory has been around since the 1960s, the 1970s, right? And like I stated, it's only taught in law school or in graduate school. So this whole idea of they need to get it right, it's been right. It's just something that's taught in college. But individuals who are against critical race theory and wanted to promote misinformation about critical race theory were the ones putting out these flyers stating that, hey, they want to teach this in high school. They want to teach this in elementary school. Something that is completely false. I've seen individuals go on TV shows and state that, hey, my child was in school and the teacher mentioned something about race. And so I immediately snatched my child out of school because that was critical race theory, which is completely false. When I was growing up in school, there were things they were mentioning about different racial ethnic groups, right? And it had nothing to do with critical race theory. So once again, the individuals who are putting in critical race theory out into the mainstream are what? Individuals that, one, are against critical race theory, and two, as I said before, there hasn't been one critical race theory scholar that has promoted the idea or even inferred the idea that critical race theory will be taught in K through 12 education.
Okay, because that's where I've seen it, was in the news media, primarily on Republican side.
Absolutely. They were making claims that were patently false.
Yes.
As I stated before, this was a solution in search of a problem. So we're going to make up a problem, and then we're going to promote ourselves as the vanguard, the saviors, to stop something that isn't even happening.
Yeah. Like I said, I didn't know too much about it, and from what I heard, it was all over the place. You had one side praising it, that it was okay, and then you had the other side. People were, like you said, that I've seen on TV, they were taking their kids out, and they were primarily white people that were doing this. So I don't know. I just would like them to see if they're gonna tell whether it's theory or whatever. Give a nobody. I don't think they've ever done a full history of our people in this country from the time.
This is the issue. Critical race theory is not is not in the discipline of history.
Right.
I'm saying that because you're conflating two separate issues. Critical race theory is in the discipline of legal studies, not in the discipline of history.
Okay, let's forget history then. How could you make critical race theory? Do you find it is it acceptable, or is it just we on the right side that don't want it?
So like I said, I've written many papers from a theoretical perspective rooted in critical race theory. I've read this book on several occasions. It makes sense to me. Critical race theory has core tenets. Some of those core tenets argue that racism is not an aberration. Racism is normal in American culture. Critical race theory argues it has a core tenet of interest convergence. It has a core theory of there's a critique of liberalism. See, most individuals who are enemies of critical race theory wouldn't even know that one of the core tenets of critical race theory is that it critiques liberalism, right? Intersectionality, anti-essentialism, meaning that they argue against this concept, an idea that members of a particular racial ethnic group hold to particular behavioral traits, right? They even make the argument to where one of the core tenets of critical race theory is that race is a social construct and it's not rooted in biological determinism, right? So once again, I take no issue with critical race theory. In fact, as I stated before, there's been the proliferation of racialized crits, such as Latin crit that focuses on, of course, racism against Latino individuals. You have Asian crit that focuses on racism against Asians. You even have tribal crit that focuses on racism against indigenous peoples. And then you have black crit that focuses on anti-black racism and anti-blackness in American society.
Well, the way you just described it, laid it out, I would definitely have to agree, because for me, racism is, like you say, institutionalized, and it's not something we are inherited. It's not inheritant, like we're inferior. So I don't understand why they have such an issue with it then.
Okay, right. And so Zongo Native and so I would push you, brother, to go out and get the book. Like, once again, you can get this on Amazon for like $4.99 and that's including the cost of shipping. So I would behoove you to just go purchase the book. This is my personal copy, Critical Race Theory and Introduction. And this is actually written by critical race theorists, right? Because oftentimes what we will find on the right is they would go get somebody who isn't a critical race theorist and then quote them and say, well, this person said this, but that person isn't a critical race theorist. We've even seen that be the case when people took umbrage with Pan-Africanism. They would have someone who isn't a Pan-Africanist making a claim about something, and then guests would say, well, this person said X, Y, Z. Yeah, but they're not a Pan-Africanist. So what do you want us to do about that, right? So Zongo Native has stated, if Black America is pushing for the American government to address the needs in the case of teaching critical race theory, it is also fair for the government to also address the needs of the LGBTQ community. So yeah, you got to come on, brother, and really unpack what you mean by this, because I see some people are saying, what are you talking about here? So definitely need you to tap in and unpack what you mean by if Black America is pushing for the American government to address the needs in the case of teaching CRT, it is also fair for the government to also address the needs of the LGBTQ community. That particularly because, Black people have been pushing the American government to address our needs long before critical race theory was even thought of, right? So definitely tap in, brother, and share with us what you actually mean. Unpack that statement that you put in the chat. But once again, I'm gonna open it back up to the panel. We got Brother Bag here, Queen Sister Kelly Brown Sugar. Appreciate her tapping in. Then we have Brother Ghost as well. So
let me ask you something, if you don't mind. Do you think that the pushback from the right, because that's where I've seen most of the pushback on CRT from the right, is because they do not want to mess the image of America up? And this kind of shows America for what it really is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they've done the same with Howard Zinn. As I said before, Howard Zinn, he's passed, but he was a radical historian who wrote the book, A People's History of America from 1492 to the present, where he argues that history is taught particularly in a form that glorifies the nation. The history is typically taught in a nationalistic manner rather than from the perspective of the actual people who lived it. And so, of course, many people on the right took umbrage with him as well, argued that he was trying to teach younger generations of Americans to hate America, so on and so forth. You know, as we stated before, they always use those terms of hating America is rooted in white fragility. But the reality of the situation is that when we're dealing with many individuals who are white racists or white supremacists, they have a image or view of America that, of course, isn't rooted in reality, but that for some reasons, psychologically, they believe is beneficial to them. And so it's almost like the child who is told that Santa Claus doesn't exist. It creates a psychological state of cognitive dissonance, right? And so you can either accept this new truth, or you could almost become a recluse mentally or ideologically, and say, you know what, I'm just going to believe what I want to believe and take almost the head in the same perspective. So,
okay.
So, Sister Kelly, Brother Ghost, tap in. Definitely. Yes, ma'am.
I want to say that I'm not against the teaching of CRT. Again, this is my first introduction to it. I would like to say that it might possibly be applicable in the teaching of history, because there's clearly some sort of confusion around the use of CRT.
Okay, and what do you think that confusion is?
Well, if it's strictly from a legal standpoint, then there would be no logical reason for it to be taught to high school students. And as you said, it's not been taught to high school students. And so that's a confusion, because look, this is funny. I grew suspicious of the Republican Party's narrative on it. I think it was on Tucker Carlson. I don't know if I can say his name or whatever, but there was a woman on there. She looked like Khloe Kardashian. It was funny. And she was saying how the school taught her son CRT, and now he's aware that he's Black, but again, this is a biracial kid. I don't know if I mentioned that. And when she tells him to do things like clean his room, he tells her she's being racist. So again, the characterization of CRT from the right definitely would fuel confusion.
Right, and really the reality is that just sounds like someone who's a bad parent, and they're just looking for an excuse, right? So yeah, that's just absolutely ridiculous. But that's one of the things that they do. Absolutely.
I don't believe the story. I don't believe. I cannot believe it. I just thought it was the funniest stuff I'd heard, because the kid his dad's Black. What do you expect?
Right, and so part of this is oftentimes if you have a Black child, and I'm saying this because we know that from a Pan-Africanist perspective, if the child has a African parent, a Black parent, we consider that child African. But if a child is racially ambiguous and is being raised in an environment that promotes a culture of racial know-nothingness, right? And the child, as I said before, looks in a manner that is racially ambiguous, the child may not know that they're Black based on what their skin tone, if they're extremely fair skinned, if their father is fair skinned, and the mother is white, and they're being raised in a manner in which they're not being taught who they actually are, then yes, they can go into a situation where they are unaware of their racial ethnic identity. And I state that because I grew up with kids like that. Their father was extremely fair skinned, had didn't have coarse hair. Their mother was white. They came out extremely fair skinned, and they had no idea that they were black because they weren't being taught. They were being raised in a culture and environment that was promoting a racial know nothingness. So, and the brother Zongo, he asked me, could I write the name of the book? So here's the book here. How was in the People's History of the United States, 1492 to the present. So this is the book I was talking about. I've actually read the book. It's a great book if you want to learn the history of America from the actual perspective of the people who lived it, rather than from a perspective that glorifies the nation state. So the People's History of America by Howard Zinn. Mr. K says the irony of critical race theory has always been practiced in academia and media to project their own critical theories about blacks as a race being non-achievers, anti-civil, and anti-intellectual. So listen, Mr. K, I'm gonna need you to tap in, be part of the conversation. I'm gonna put the link in the chat right now, and I'm gonna need you to tap in and actually break down what you mean by that, as well as give some examples, right? So you've made a provocative claim, as you should, and as you may, as you all know why I welcome diversity of thought, but I'm going to need you to tap in and actually substantiate the claims that you're making, right? So I need you to give me actual examples of critical race theorists who actually are promoting critical race theory, but using it in a manner in which they're actually trying to undermine Black racial progress and actually reinforce racialized stereotypes about Black people. So Mr. K, if you're out there, please tap in and do that. As I stated before, I believe, of course, in diversity of thought. Only thing I ask is that if you make a claim, you must substantiate it, and please don't make a claim that is, of course, patently false. But once again, Mr. K, if you're out there, I just put the link in the chat. I want you to tap in and, of course, help us deconstruct the claim that you're making. So, because from far as I know, from the critical race theories that I've read, from, of course, the Robert Delgados to the Kimberly Crenshaws to the David Bells, that has not been the case, right? And so what they are oftentimes, what I've read in critical race theory is from several critical race theorists, is there's the belief that Black people have been achievers, Black people have been civil, Black people have been intellectuals, right? But as a result of structural and institutional barriers, Black people weren't able to accomplish things based on their own merit. And as a result, we were being blocked because of our race, right? And they give numerous examples of this, right? And I could give examples just off the top of my dome. So please, Mr. K, if you can, tap in and be part of the conversation, but I'm gonna open it back up to the panel.
I have a question. Since it's critical race theory, the only race I've heard mentioned is Black. Does it include Mexicans, Asians, or is it just focused on Blacks?
Yes, as I stated before, critical race theory, one is focuses on people of color. As I stated, there are a number of racialized crits that have, of course, extended from critical race theory, such as Latinx crit, Lat crit, which focuses on Latinos, that face Latino, anti-Latino racism. You have Asian crit that focuses on racism against Asians. You have tribal crit that focuses on racism against indigenous people. Then you have Black crit that focuses on, of course, racism against Black people, what we like to call anti-Black racism. So yes, critical race theory focuses on racism against people of color. But since as critical race theory has grown and developed as a academic theory, there was the development of racialized crits to address the specific racism that each racial ethnic group faces in America.
Interesting.
Yeah.
If we were all Americans, they should do away with the race issue, labeling people Black, white, brown.
Well, I mean, that sounds good, but I think one of the things that we have to realize is that America is a racialized society.
Yes.
And legal decisions, right, particularly from a legal perspective, are made based on race, and they historically have been based on race. The other issue is that when you say, well, do away with race, right, well, you're still going to have ethnicity there, because the concept and idea of being an American is rooted, according to what Dr. Diane Kendall argues in her book, Social Problems in a Diverse Society. isn't a what they actually call a solid. I think it's a solid bowl theory. Is actually what the Anglo conformity theory. So she argues that the reality is when people say do away with race and we're just all Americans, is rooted in what? Focusing on getting people of color to assimilate to the values, cultures, perspectives, and worldviews of Anglo-Saxons in America. That's the reality. Yeah. And so we see this a lot, particularly with Black children who are being, who have white foster or, adoptive parents. The child knows they're Black, but the parents raise them to believe that racism doesn't exist. You don't need to be proud of being Black. We're just all the same person. But the basis of what it means to be a person is rooted in whiteness. Right? So these are things you have to look at, and that's why those type of things are problematic.
Yeah, I was looking at it from the fact of, I'm a proud African American, so I don't see a problem with my African roots and my African culture, but it just seems like, man, there's just so much to divide people on in this country. The United States markets itself well to the world, but inside their house, man, it is just jacked up. I mean,
the reality of this situation is the majority of the people in the world, not just in America, are ethnocentric, meaning they're going to look out for their own ethnic, racial group of people. So the reality is that we as Black people have to do the same thing because no one's going to save us but ourselves.
Agreed.
So, and so I never even have a concern with, we're coming together to do what? They ain't gonna share any power or wealth with us, so what's the point? You're right. So what, just for social, I'm not interested in social equality, right? To where you can live next to whoever you want. That doesn't concern me in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
Because that doesn't get down to the bottom line, and that is that there's a power gap between Black people and everyone else, not only here in America, but throughout the world. So we could come together all we want. We could go to school with different individuals. We could work with different individuals, right? But at the we could live next to different individuals. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to who has power and who does not.
I want to say something.
Yes, ma'am.
Is critical race theory attempting to break down or negate the history of supremacy that we've had in the country? The country was built on racism. It's not just a stain on the fabric, it's a part of the fabric. And right. So I don't think it's ever going to get to a place where we're all going to get along, but we have to be able to agree. I have an understanding. And so my question is, does critical race theory attempt to reconcile or break down the legacy of racism in the country? And if it does, good.
Yes. So as I stated, the first core tenet of critical race theory is that racism is not an aberration. It is what? It is a normal aspect of American society and culture. That is the first core tenet of critical race theory. Racism is not an aberration. It is a what? Normal aspect of American history, heritage, and culture. And so I would just push everyone, please, if you get a chance, purchase the book and read it for yourself. And a lot of the confusion, of course, I think will be dispelled, but please. And I think one of the reasons why there is so much confusion is why many individuals on the right are even doing this, because they know most people don't know anything about critical race theory. So as a result, they just hear what people say and they go along with that. But yes, please, as I said, the book probably only costs $5 with shipping. Purchase the book, read it. It's an easy read. And I'm quite sure as a result, you will come to the same conclusion that I did. All right, appreciate you topping back in, sister. I thought you got mad at me and hung up.
No, I think I disconnected it. Okay. I understood what you said.
Yes. So yes, so as I stated, yes, critical race theory, the first core tenet of critical race theory is that racism is not an aberration, but is a normalized feature of American society. That is the first core tenet of critical race theory.
I nod back to what's currently in the media because I think that's applicable. We have to, when critical race theory was formed in the 60s, media wasn't what it was today. And I think it's a powerful weapon that demeans Black Americans.
Yes.
Dang, I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
No, you was cooking, sister. You was cooking.
Yeah, I was, but I lost the train of thought.
Absolutely.
Give me a second.
It's all right. So Mr. K says, I must admit that Carol Anderson, if you don't know, Carol Anderson is a professor of African American Studies at Emory University in Atlanta. Shout out to the ATL, the 404. She has done some great talks about the true intent of the campaign for teaching critical race theory and how it is how to use it effectively. So definitely want to give a shout out to Mr. K and his sister, Dr. Carol Anderson. Let's make sure we put some respect on her name and regarding some of the great work that she does in terms of incorporating critical race theory and a lot of the books and, of course, writings that she actually has written. So, so back to you, Sister Kelly.
The teacher that it was just making its round in the media. The teacher that told his class that he was ethnocentric. What's your opinion on that?
Well, most people are ethnocentric. Yeah, but there's a difference between being ethnocentric, meaning viewing the world from the perspective of your own history, heritage, and cultural group, and being an ethno-racist. Those are two different things. But unfortunately, when most white people state that they're ethnocentric, it means that they're ethno-racist. Just like when most white people advocate white power, they're not saying, hey, we just want to be able to control the politics and economics of our communities. They're saying that, no, we want to be able to control the politics and economics of everyone's community, including the people in those communities, because we are superior to other people. So, yeah. But so I guess he was trying to, play some word games. But go ahead. What were you going to say, sister?
That's what I wanted. What you just clarified what I was wondering, and how that would converge with the number one tenet of critical race theory. I do that he was racist, but I just, thought it was interesting.
Right. Yeah.
I just want to say something real quick if I can on that. I saw that video, and one thing I think is important to note is if you look around, I don't know for sure, but looking at them, they look like about middle school age, maybe. So, I thought it was an interesting thing to be saying in that sort of classroom. I think that would be probably tough to digest anywhere below like the advanced placement or, IB level, if you guys have that in your parts of the country. But yeah, so for him to be saying that to like middle school students to me is a little bit questionable, not so much because I question what he was saying. I mean, to me as an adult, even as a black guy, it's like I look at it as like I get what he's saying. It's just like what Lumumba just said. Yeah, I understand it, but for you to be saying that in a classroom of some middle school kids, especially it looked like majority black kids at least that were around him, it was like like why would you it just seems like an odd statement to kind of make. So that's the kind of thing I don't know if he was racist necessarily, but it definitely is an odd thing to state in front of some kids who are probably too young to really fully understand exactly what you're saying.
What is it that you're trying to say? Absolutely.
Right.
I'm with you 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. And so as a result, that tends to be what happens. And they say, well, see, my professor said that he's ethnocentric. And there's nothing wrong with it, not knowing what he actually means by saying that, what's the intent behind it. And, it's really to cause confusion. So, because once again, being ethnocentric is not tantamount to being a bigot or being prejudiced, right? So I could be ethnocentric, right, and have pride in who I am as an African American, being a person of African descent, but that doesn't mean that I harbor negative views against other racial ethnic groups. But oftentimes, unfortunately, when the white folks, them folks, make that claim, that's what they're saying. That's what that means.
That's what I feel his intent was.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, he did actually say in the video, he did say, I believe most people are, ethnocentric or
This
race
is
first. I'm
true.
not exactly sure exactly what words he used, but he said that. But then my thing is like, why would you try to have that sort of level of conversation with some, whatever they are, 12, 13-year-old kids
Mhm.
that they can't intellectually have that conversation and debate you on that level. So it's kind of like a disingenuous thing to do. So yeah, that's the issue I have with it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because my children are intelligent, but if I walked up to my daughter, and we've talked about this before, the first time I asked her, "Do you know what it means to be ethnocentric?" She said no. Right, and so of course, I told her. Actually, I grabbed the book and had her read the definition. Now, you tell me what it means after you read it. Right, reading comprehension always in place in the Lumumba household. Right, but once again, like as you stated, that's not something they're going to be able to actually digest and truly understand. And maybe a 15-20 minute conversation with a teacher, with an adult that is in a position of power, and is really interested in disseminating their views or imparting their views onto the children, rather than having them develop their own ideas, ideas and concepts. So it's I can see why you feel that it's problematic.
I seen that same video, and I seen that the kids were quite intelligent enough to understand what he was saying, his body language, that the guy was a racist. They said it several times that he was a racist, just based off what was coming out of his mouth.
Okay.
So they were intelligent enough to pick that up off him. I'll give him that.
Okay. Gotcha. So, okay. Very good. Very good. Very good. Any other thoughts?
I could tell the kids they felt there was a certain level of powerlessness on the kids' part too. Yes, I do think that they understood exactly what he was saying. To say that, I think everybody's a little racist is trying to share the blame. I think it's disingenuous, and it's akin to saying, well, I don't care if they're purple or pink or polka. Like it's disingenuous, and it's designed to demean the conversation and the person's intelligence.
Absolutely. And most individuals on the right, I even have a cousin who engaged, I've had to correct him about this. He would say, well, everyone's racist. And I said, no, everyone tends to be ethnocentric. Being racist is something completely different, because as we know, racism is defined as what? Engaging in action or behavior that adversely affects a group of people based on what? The color of their skin. Right? So racism was prejudice plus power. Not everyone has the ability to be racist. For example, I'm gonna put this question out for the panel. Can Black people be racist?
Yes,
No.
I'm actually gonna say yes.
Okay, please. And so we're gonna get to Ghost, and we're gonna go to Sister Kelly, and then we're gonna go to Brother Bag. Why do you say yes, Black people can be racist?
I feel like I just want to say before I say anything, I've been waiting years to finally have this debate. But the reason why I would say yes is because I've read the dictionary definition as well, looked it up on dictionary.com or whatever it is, Webster's. And yeah, I mean the thing is, it's really just anyone can basically be racist. It's really just one definition anyway. Is just basically like the prejudice. I almost probably should pull it up and read it, but it really is just basically any sort of sort of attack or prejudice or discrimination based on race. That is one of the definitions. So yeah, anyone can be racist. Where Black people's argument is that they're saying that we don't have the power to. What we can't do is we don't have the power to effectively, basically practice racism or use it as sort of a mechanism to actually like
So
affect anything. But
what you're referring to is prejudice. What you're referring to is bigotry.
sure.
Right? Bigotry and being prejudiced is different from actual racism. To be racist, to implement racism against an individual or a group, you have to have what?
Power.
Exactly.
Well,
You
yeah,
have to
okay.
this is just a reality.
I get what you're saying, but I just I had to pull it up because I already knew we was gonna get to here. So, all right, here's one definition: a belief that race is a fundamental determinant. This is Merriam-Webster.com. A belief that a race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. So you could have that belief and be black, but that doesn't mean the thing is you just don't have the power.
Well,
And so,
that's a definition of scientific racism. But we're talking about a working definition in the real world. And that's why I gave that definition. This is also the definition that Sister she wrote the book on post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? Is power plus prejudice.
So the way you're kind of saying is almost this is oversimplifying it, but almost like a verb, right? Like or a practice. That's kind of the
Yes.
way you're.
Yes. Yeah. Dr. Joy DeGury Leary, she wrote the book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, even when Dr. Khalid Muhammad was alive and he went on the Phil Donahue show in 1994, he even gave the definition of racism as what? Power plus prejudice, the ability to adversely affect a group of people based on their racial identity, right? Because everyone cannot like someone. I could say I'm going to kill I'm going to say I could say I'm a murder, death, kill everyone on my block. It doesn't make me a murderer until I actually do it.
Here's why I think it's kind of dangerous, though, and I get your perspective and other people's, but the thing I just think is kind of dangerous because it's like people kind of view it as a way to. I feel like some people kind of present it as a way to absolve them of any of their, things. Which I don't really think. My thing is, I don't think that either side is superior to the other, at least as far as anything that I know. I don't think that just kind of like chanting or just talking about your superiority of your race. I don't think that's like productive or a good thing. And I think that some black people kind of go down that path as sort of like a defense mechanism, honestly.
Mhm.
That's I guess that's my thing is
Right,
I
but
just feel
that's
like
not racism is power. You got to have power to be racist. That's just the reality. A lot of people talk a good game, right? A lot of people, they're HBO commentator. They just talk a good fight. But we're talking about, well, if you want to talk about anti-Black racism or anti-Latino racism, anti-Polynesian racism, they're going to tell you it had nothing to do with what the people said. It had to do with what they were able to do. And power is what? The ability to create someone else's reality and have them accept it as their own. Hawaiians, Polynesian people in Hawaii, in the archipelago of Hawaii, did not want to be what? A member of the a member of the United States of America. But America had the power under manifest destiny to make it happen against their will, and they had to accept it as a fact.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree that the action side of the word, and yeah, in order to really practice it, yeah, you do obviously need
So in
power.
order to be a racist, you have to have power. You can't just,
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
this is a reality.
I mean, I don't know if I can agree because you can still have the idea in your head, but I get what you're saying.
Once again, and that makes you prejudiced. That makes you a bigot, but it doesn't make you a racist. There's a difference there. I've been guilty in my life of bigotry before, right? But there's a difference between bigotry and racism, right?
Okay, I get what you're saying. I mean, I'm just saying the definition though does encompass prejudice. There's places where you can look up the definition, where it does kind of
Well, and
include
it
that. But I
depends
get what you're
on
saying.
what literature you're citing. That's just the reality.
Right.
So, Sister Kelly Brown Sugar from Fort Wayne, Indiana. What say you?
My understanding of racism and what it is that in the plainest form, denying someone a need or a service based off of their race. We don't have the power to do so.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, again, putting it in plain terms, when you think about it, even at work, we don't have the numbers. We don't have the numbers to group together to exert force over another person and deny them a need or a service. So I do not think that we can be racist. If the tides were to turn, if we were the bigger number, yes, possibly, but as it stands, no.
Well, I would even argue, even if we were the bigger number, we have to look at, particularly when we talk about racism in America, is oftentimes been codified and supported and undergirded by what? The law. So it wasn't just white folk in mass numbers going out and doing stuff. They had the law backing them up, right? So that's a big issue with that, and that's why I said it comes down to power. Because if white people would engage in white vigilantism, but when they engaged in white vigilantism against black people, guess what? The sheriff and the police department backed them up, right? So part of it, we have to understand it takes power to be racist, right? And so I think this is something that many people miss. It comes down to power, power, power. So if a group of white folk busted in my house and said, we taking over, I'm gonna go get that thing and blah, 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 right? But if they come in and they got the sheriff's department with them, I'm SOL. You see what I'm saying? So I think we have to understand the dynamic that power plays in racism, not just animus, not just prejudice, not just bigotry, not just numbers, there's strength in numbers, but also the fact that what? They're backed by the law, by the legal system. And that's why when we look at critical race theory, having a background in legal studies, we look at the brilliant, powerful warrior scholar, Michelle Alexander, in her book, The New Jim Crow, which I actually have. I would push all of you to read it. She talks about how anti-Black racism was codified and supported through the legal system. As I said it before, Isabella Wilkerson, in her brilliant book that just came out and actually won a Pulitzer Prize, if I'm a New York Times bestseller, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent. She talks about what? The legal system undergirding and supporting the racial caste system of anti-Blackness in America. So it isn't just people with guns. The law is on their side, and of course, holding Black people back and making us what Martin Delany stated back in the 19th century, denizens in America rather than citizens. So I think it's very important. The reason why I'm really pushing this point, and I apologize if I'm being didactic in nature, is because if we're going to fight against something, we have to actually know what it is we're fighting against, right? And I don't think you can defeat an enemy if you don't actually know what the enemy actually is, right? It's just like in football, the quarterback has to read the defense, but he isn't going to be able to throw a touchdown if he doesn't know what defense the other team is playing, is putting out there against him. And so we have to understand the same, that this comes down to power, and that power is being backed by the law. Brother Design, appreciate you tapping in, brother. Hope you could tap in and be part of the conversation as well. As you all know, we're having a robust, intellectually stimulating conversation regarding the core tenets of critical race theory and why they matter. Make sure you hit the subscribe and the like button as well as the notification bell. And like, share, and subscribe with all friends and well-wishers. You're watching Lumumba Speaks here on YouTube, a Black Empowerment Initiative where we believe we can always bet on Black. So Brother Bag 76 first, what do you say regarding can Black people be racist?
I'm not sure if Black people can be racist, but I felt like I was one. And it was due to the fact that if a white person called me the N-word, then I fought the person with malicious hatred in my heart and said some of the vilest things to him while we were fighting. So I don't know. I felt like one at the time.
That's fighting racism. That's reacting to racism. That's not being racist.
Well, words came out of my mouth.
Once again, as it was, yes, but that was a defense mechanism against you fighting against racism.
Well, I wish I would have talked to you years ago then, because
that's the way it is.
I felt bad.
Example, when our ancestors were fighting against the slave masters, and they were fighting for the liberation of maroon societies in the Caribbean and Brazil and Florida. And when they were leading these shipboard insurrections during the Middle Passage or fighting against, and rebelling here in America, I'm quite sure they used some not so flattering terms against the slave master when they were physically fighting for their freedom. That happens. Doesn't make you a racist. When I used to box, I used to be calling my opponent everything but a child of God. Did I actually feel that way about him? No. But these are the type of things that happen when you're in the heat of battle.
Gotcha. Okay. I'd have to say no, because we don't own anything.
I'm sorry,
we don't have the power. Since we do not have the power, assets, or resources in this country, it would be hard to put us in a situation that we could be racist then.
Right. Correct. Yeah. And we don't have the backing or undergirding of the legal system. Right? Because what we have to understand is that, and I tell people this all the time, was that when we look at, and particularly anti-Black racism, right, and white supremacy, anti-Black racism was codified in the law. There were Black codes, not just after Reconstruction. There were Black codes implemented during the antebellum era, during the 13 colonies, that prohibited Black people from moving in groups and owning firearms, so on and so forth. When we still see these type of views about Black people being used and disseminated in law enforcement to this day. Right? So having that power is backed by law, by the legal system. Very important to understand that. Very important to understand that. As the brother was saying, what Ahmaud Arbery, the courageous brother who unfortunately lost his life at the hands of those white vigilantes. We're talking about real life white vigilantes thinking they run around trying to be Bruce Wayne in this motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? And what ended up taking place was those white vigilantes called the police, showed the police officer on their cell phones what they did, and the cop said, okay, you're free to go. Once again, we're talking about racism, white supremacy, anti-Blackness being codified, by the legal system.
That's why you now see all these back to blue flags going around.
Come on now.
With the stripe, it's the last defense to protect white people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's white power. Why we know that, particularly in the South, the police were created as a result of slave catchers. I actually have a book on it.
Well, that's part of the reason why the Second Amendment existed in militias, was to keep slaves in check.
Yes, absolutely. I read a book on that. The Second Amendment was created as a way of keeping slaves in check. Because as Malcolm X said many years ago, and we know Malcolm X was a master teacher, he stated in order to enslave a people, you have to take away their ability to defend themselves. So once again, this all comes back to the legal system. And if you want to read a book about the creation of police in the South being rooted in, of course, being slave catchers, this is a great book that touches on it. It's called Black Police in America by W. Marvin Dulaney. And the first chapter touches on that, right? So definitely, if you want to review that, understand that, check that out. But once again, as I stated before, racism is rooted in the legal system, right? And so I think that's something that we have to understand. Any final thoughts before we close out?
I want to say the police don't even protect them. It's not that they're not obligated.
When you say that, who are you referring to?
Well, Warren versus DC states that the police have no obligation to offer anyone protection, just enforce policy and investigate crime.
Well, everyone knows that. Everybody, going back to the 70s, they would say the job of the police is not to protect people, it's to protect property.
That's why I own guns.
Think so. Exactly. I'm a firm advocate of Black gun ownership.
Yes, so am I. Yeah. Listen, I believe in chitty chitty bang bang. Okay, you better ask somebody. My daughter was like,
Stockpile ammunition.
my daughter, yes. Matter of fact, one of my mentors from Detroit, shout out to the 313. He told me, he says, every paycheck you need to be buying ammunition. I was like,
Yep.
what? He said, what's the good of having a firearm and you run out of ammo? Yeah.
You should always have at least 2,000 rounds minimum.
He told me the same thing. And I said, yes, sir. That's a 10-4 captain. I'm on my way to the store now. Because you never know what may happen.
No, and it's a good idea to also get a ballistic vest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I even take my daughter to the range with me. I've had my daughter in the range with me since she was 11 years old shooting.
That's good.
Yeah. She knows how to, clean, a little 9. She know how to clean it, do everything. Absolutely.
That's good.
Now she ain't ready for that shotty yet, though. She ain't ready for that Mossberg pump, but I'm gonna get her there. But tonight, M says, I'm so glad I found this live stream. I appreciate you finding the live stream, brother or sister. I don't know your gender identity. I hope that you subscribe, like, hit the notification bell, because I think we're going to be at it tomorrow where we're going to be talking about Black atheism, right? And why the Black atheist community matters, right? But appreciate you tapping in. Appreciate you finding this live stream. Please make sure you hit the subscribe and like button and share with your friends and family as well. So yes, I am a huge advocate of the Second Amendment, and I really appreciate Brother Bag 76 first stating the fact that, of course, the Second Amendment was created as a way to corral and control our ancestors, our enslaved ancestors. So that's a great point that many people do not know. But even though that is the case, I do believe, as Malcolm X stated, listen, if I got a gun and you got a gun, you can't play, you can't boss me around. So, but yeah, I'm a huge advocate of black gun ownership. Absolutely. Brother Ghost, what say you?
Yeah, definitely a very informative, live stream, and I'm glad that the new member here, Mr. or Mrs. Tonight M joined us, and hopefully they got something from it. And so yeah, as far as the whole discussion, I mean, I think we pretty much covered everything that we were talking about tonight. So that was good. I don't really know if I have too many more comments. So like I said, just a good live stream. I definitely learned a little bit about it because like I didn't know anything about it. So really, so that was good. But let me see, what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, no, I mean I'm definitely pro gun as well. That would be one of those things I think we can use to our advantage on the conservative Republican side. I don't own any guns myself right now, but I'm definitely pro for it.
You better go get some, brother. You better go get some, brother.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, man. We'll get to it. But but yeah, the point is, I'm not working against it or anything. So yeah, but what was I gonna say? All right, yeah. So I want to say, did you wanna say anything? You said you might mention something about the whole Shanquella, whatever her last name was, and
yes, sir. I appreciate you bringing that up. So, what are you all's thoughts? I don't know if you all are familiar with the situation where it happened with the sister who took what I would presume was a francation with some sisters and some brothers to Mexico. And we saw a video of her being attacked by one of the Black women. And then, of course, her being left there in Mexico. And unfortunately, it's just very strange. It seems like her girlfriends were calling her mother, telling her that she was suffering from alcohol poisoning, but the autopsy showed she died of blunt force trauma. What are you all thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll just kind of go first and I'll let some other people talk here. But what I would say is, I definitely want to see more. I don't want to give too many, statements because I don't really know enough about the facts of the case. But from what little I have seen, I've been trying to watch a couple things, even tonight. Been trying to watch a couple things, read a couple things. But it seems to be a lot of we don't really have all the facts. Even the people that are kind of following it and making live streams and stuff, they don't really have all the facts, I think. But I think it's like a lot of other situations. The good news is some people kind of have a general where like everybody on this panel, everybody probably has a good idea of, what to do, what not to do. But I think one thing I'm taking away early on is definitely like it's a good thing in the sense it's not a good thing obviously that she lost her life and the whole thing happened, but it is
Right.
a good thing that people are starting conversations about it. And I think the direction of some of the conversations is a good thing as well because a lot of times we have these like there's pro-black spaces or the manosphere space or whatever spaces that certain people are in, we kind of know what to do. So like not to say that's a bad thing that we have the conversations, but it's like we're not the ones that really need to be talking about it. It's the ones that, you know, that really need to be talking about it that are not talking about it. So I think
Right.
this one is kind of getting into those sectors because it seems like the group of people that she was with and that she was in, some of those people are maybe probably not some of the most like pro-black type of space people, so they're kind of looking at it. And then I think so that's one thing, just the fact that different people are looking at, why is this sort of thing. There's a lot of things involved in that that you could look at. You say, why are you in this position? First
Right.
of all, and then second of all, I would say the whole traveling to one thing I think we need to look at, and I hate to say this, but like we got
Come
to be
on with
real
it.
careful. Yeah, we got to be real careful where we travel, who we travel with, and specifically where we travel with these people. I mean, it's like because when we're going to these places, man, I mean, you got to be careful because it's like you're already dealing with situations where you could already be dealing with something there, just dealing with the people that are there. And I'm not racist or anything. But I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of things that go on, and people are just kind of jumping on planes and just doing things. And it's like, I feel like people don't really think things through sometimes. It's like you're going to these foreign countries, and, I mean, we barely have rights over here, protections over here, but it's like you really think that you can just roll into some of these countries, they're gonna look out for you. And in that particular country, from what I understand, there's already been other issues with black men and women, you know what I'm saying, who were probably either not surrounded by as many people who might not have their best interests at heart, but definitely weren't in the situation she was in. So it's on top of that, you compound it with the fact that it doesn't look like some of these people were really looking out for you like that. So it's just like we're putting ourselves in some bad positions, so I just feel like all of those things are
So,
just
so let
things
me
to
say
really
this.
look at.
So let me say this. Well, first and foremost, for me, I believe that leaving America and traveling abroad is good for your mental health if you are a black person. So that's number one. I travel abroad all the time. People call me Mr. International because my passport looked like the subway in Harlem, right? The second issue is marked up like the subway in Harlem. Is yes, it doesn't look like she was in an environment of people who were black-minded. If I was in that situation, I would have been like, listen, y'all not about to be sitting up here and fighting. This is unbecoming. We're supposed to be having a good time. Da, 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 da. These are the type of things I would have said, right? However, I think what we have to look at is, unfortunately, it comes down to, because she wasn't the victim of people in Mexico. She was the victim of what? Her own brothers and sisters who were African American, unfortunately. And so I think that is the issue that we have to look at. Unfortunately, right? It's the fact that, unfortunately, what we find is that we do harm to each other in a number, in particular in terms of violence, that what? The dwarfs all other racial ethnic groups in America combined. Right? Because for me, as a man who is black-minded, there's no way I would have sat there and said, yeah, you just need to fight back. That's just absolutely ridiculous. The other issue, Brother Zongo Native said, you don't need a gun if you live in a safe neighborhood. Well, here's the part of the reality of the situation. Gun violence is endemic to America, right? So you don't have to be in a bad neighborhood to be the victim of a violent crime. We know all the times that we have individuals who are innocent victims of gun violence, right? People just walking down the street and they're hit by a stray bullet, or we have even seen situations where people living in what we would call good neighborhoods, individuals are coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and coming to these wealthy neighborhoods and robbing people, holding them at gunpoint, so on and so forth. So it doesn't really matter what neighborhood you live in. If someone wants what you have, they're going to try to take it. Sister Kelly Brown Sugar, what say you?
I have a daughter, so there's a reason why I feel like guns are necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know much about what's happened. I've just read a little bits and pieces, but I want to say I'm in aviation, and I don't even trust my coworkers enough to really travel with them like that, and I have to. Okay, so friends, that's a whole nother story too. I'd rather travel alone, honestly.
Okay.
It's devastating that they left her. They just left her. No care for the parents, no respect for the parents, no respect for her. They just left her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that shows they really, really, truly did not have a care concern for that sister at all. I mean, that's just absolutely mind blowing to me that they would do something like that to another Black woman. Just unbelievable, untenable, if you ask me.
That's like, I know what you did last summer type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So my mom, she would tell us not to really hang out and party like that with people, because watching those movies, it's always a group that's like, we're going to take this to our grave, and so it shows in how they treated her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunate that would take place, particularly on a vacation. I mean, I couldn't. I mean, just the way I move, I couldn't be in an environment like that, right? If someone was engaging in that type of behavior, I'd be like, listen, and this might be coming off as trying to be macho, but I mean, y'all not about to be doing that around me. You're not about to be fighting. I'm here to have a good time. But once again, I wouldn't even be associating with individuals who engage in that type of behavior. I am vehemently opposed to Black on Black crime, Black on Black violence. And that violence could be psychological, it could be verbal, it could be emotional, it could be mental, it could be physical. I'm vehemently against it, right? But as Design says, it sounds like some stuff in the movie. Absolutely, like Sister Kelly Brown Sugar said, it sounds like from the movie. I Know What You Did Last Summer, and we're dating ourselves, but we remember that movie came out in the late '90s. It was basically a summer blockbuster. It was a teen hit, and basically, I think they were on a vacation somewhere, and they were, I think, drinking, and they hit some guy on the side of the road. And instead of like trying to revive him or take him to the hospital, I think they hit him or so-called buried him off the side of the road. And the guy ended up surviving and then coming after them, right? So definitely is I Know What You Did Last Summer vibe. Absolutely. Brother Bag, what say you?
Well, what stood out for me was, if it's true, the income disparity. If this individual paid for these people to be there, you could see maybe there's some jealousy. They're probably feeling a little, less than she is. And you have to be very careful of being around people that cannot pay their way in life.
Mm-hmm.
Because this can happen. I mean, I've seen it to where you didn't buy a person a drink and the person wants to get physical. Because you don't want to buy.
We're not talking about Olivia Elton John physical, right? So we're talking about a whole different kind of physical. We're not talking about Olivia Elton John. So
no, because when people can't pay their way, they want to go to in a place like this. They want to feel special. They want to feel like they're the person, but they're not. They're riding on somebody's coattails. That's how they got there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that played a part of this. Person had means. And, they just didn't like it. They weren't the person. That's how I look at it, because I've personally witnessed it and seen it. Like one time I went to a store and, hey, man, I need a nickel. Hook me up with a nickel. Guy gave me a nickel. A week later, he comes back wanting $500. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to give you $500. He said, remember when I hooked you up? That was a nickel. You're trying to make a nickel into $500? No, we weren't friends and had bad feelings. So when it comes to not being able to support yourself, man, it's not pretty. They'll smile in your face, do everything to make you think you're friends, and really you're not their friend. They don't like you, and they're plotting against you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've only traveled with people that I've known since I was in grade school. So I've never traveled with people that I didn't know for decades. But yeah, it's just a truly unfortunate situation. Once again, this is a Black person, an African person who has lost their life in a rather untimely manner and an extremely violent manner, and it just really hurts me because I believe as a people we have to find a way, in my opinion, to incorporate the idea of Dr. King internally, right? And I just yes sir, go ahead.
These people went to the mother's house after it was over, making up stuff, and the mother got different stories
from everyone. Yeah,
that's what I mean.
Something different. But I think she was on the phone with them when she was getting different stories. She was getting different stories from the individuals on the vacation while they were still in Mexico.
Right, but she didn't get the truth.
Right, but she didn't get the truth.
And it's just this is where we're at. I mean, this is pathetic. No conscience, nothing. I mean, how can you sit there and videotape somebody and you tell her to fight back and she says no, and you still film and watch this person get beat on? That just messed me up.
Yeah, it's not something that I could do. This isn't grade school, right? We're talking about adults here, so
exactly.
I that really boiled my grits, for lack of better words. That really infuriated me to see that happen because I just don't like seeing people being victimized, right? I mean, I kind of grew up, I grew up in a tough neighborhood where you had to fight every day. You was gonna get your Pumas took and go home barefoot, crying, right? But there was a certain thing about if the person didn't want to fight, you left them alone. And that's just not something that I could understand in any way, shape, or form. So it was extremely unbecoming for me. But I hope that the individuals that are responsible for that sister's untimely death are brought to justice, right? And so it just really turned my stomach to see this situation. And so for someone to go on vacation, hey, I'm kind of leaving the rat race of work and paying bills. I'm just going to come have a good time and then have something like that take place. It's just, especially even for the parent, your child is going off and traveling, and I'm going to be traveling later next week, and then the parent gets a phone call that your child is deceased. And it's anyone who's a parent knows, and Sister Kelly, I know you're a parent, you can speak to this. The worst thing that can ever happen as a parent is that you have to bury your child rather than your child bury you.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
It keeps me up at night. The first thing I wake up to, the fear, I make sure I get my daughter on and off the school bus, supervised for that reason. I would not, and see, I'm a little different. I want to hurt them. They better hope the police get them first before I do. That's just me. It's my daughter.
How old is your child, if you don't mind me asking?
She's 10.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. Yeah. So any other thoughts? Any other thoughts?
Only I hope they spend the rest of their life in a Mexican jail, not an American. Since it happened in Mexico, let them stay down there.
Right. I wonder if America would extradite, but once again, Mexico let them go. So, you would think at least a person would be held on suspicion of murder. I'm thinking it from an American context of if someone, and yes, I know a bit about the criminal justice system because I've been involved in the criminal justice system. If something like that would happen, you would be arrested on a suspicion of murder, on a preliminary murder charge. In Ohio, they could hold you for 48 hours, right? And try to gather evidence. If they can't gather evidence in that 48 hours, you would have to be released. But of course, they could come back at any time, present evidence to the grand jury, and of course, indict you. But that didn't happen in Mexico. I'm not too familiar with the legal system in Mexico. But just once again, just a situation that's just extremely unbecoming to that, so when someone goes on vacation, you're expecting to have a good time, you're expecting to get your drink on and, have a good time and get a tan, as they say, and then you never make it home. Because what it seems to be in that video was that she was vacationing with some individuals who, in my opinion, were miscreants. And as a result, she lost her life, right? So just extremely unfortunate, because like I said, to be in a situation where, hey, fight back, and she says, I don't want to fight back. So I'm presuming, of course, that she wasn't into violence. She didn't want to fight. She didn't want to be engaged in that type of behavior. And for her to lose her life, it's just, yeah.
Yeah, it's a sad situation. I just hope we get some more, information and we can learn. I'm sure we'll all be able to learn something from it. But one thing I'm just taking away from here is like, one thing we can say is that I don't think it's likely that there's anything that she could have done that would have justified taking her life.
Mhm.
She's a young black woman, and of all the instances where we hear all this, protect black women and blah, 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 it's like a situation where, in this case, like I said, like, what is it that she could have done that would have justified taking her life in that manner? And, I just think that we can all hopefully learn something about that whole entire situation. Like, why is she there? Why is she with those people? Why did they let that happen to her? Why did they do that? The whole thing, I just think is something that we will be able to take something from if we're watching and paying attention. And I just hope that we do, because she shouldn't be losing her life like that at whatever age she was, 23 or whatever it is. She shouldn't be in that situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're gonna take it to final thoughts before we close out. And as I stated before, we're gonna be back at it tomorrow. So make sure you tap in tomorrow. I think we're gonna be getting started tomorrow at, drum roll please, 8 p.m., where we're gonna be discussing why Black atheism matters. So final thoughts, we're gonna close out for this evening.
I was surprised that the news showed her that it got as much traction as it did. It's not common. And I hope that more deaths like this get attention for Black women, especially Black women traveling abroad. Now that we're able to actually amass the money to travel and interact with other cultures, I suppose we have to be aware, be made aware of the dangers that lurk when we do travel.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Brother Bag?
I want to thank you for the show. I've learned about CRT. I have a different opinion. I was getting a lot of information from Fox News, and what you see, the videos, I know not to believe news, but I just kind of thought it was something wasn't right. And it's just good that you explained it and cleared things up. Thank you.
No problem. No problem. Appreciate you. That's why I'm here, right? Brother Ghost.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. Yeah, just, thank you for that, clearing everything up and providing some more insight and information and how it can kind of help us in more of a, I guess pro-Black or Pan-African or whatever word you want to use perspective as far as, kind of advancing our cause. So, yeah, great all around. So you're doing a show tomorrow about the atheism versus
So no,
what
no,
was it?
no verses, no verses. We're not going to do a
Okay.
verse. We're just going to talk about Black atheism and the Black culture and the Black community. Many people argue that Black atheists are seen as a pariah in the Black activist communities. As we know, most Black people are religious, right? And we know that many Black social movements have had a religious component, from the Garvey movement to the SCLC, civil rights movement, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to take a look at that. I think we'll maybe even try to, focus on Hubert Harrison, who was known as the Black atheist, also was known as the Black Socrates. And then, of course, we'll take a look at one Carlos Cooks, who was the ideological son of one Marcus Garvey. He was a Pan-Africanist as well as an atheist. So I think we'll take a look at some preeminent Black intellectuals, Black activists who, of course, were atheists. We would try to maybe even extrapolate why they haven't been centered in many of the narratives, conversations, and of course, scholarly texts that gives backgrounds on some of the charismatic Black leaders in these different social movements. But then more importantly, we want to take a look at why Black atheism matters, right? So that's what the show will be about tomorrow. I have a brother from Chicago, Brother Dalo Kenyatta. He's going to be tapping in. He's a Pan-Africanist as well. So I'm just looking forward to having a great conversation, robust conversation. So I hope all of you all will be able to be back tomorrow. Same time, same place, same channel. LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we can gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. Until next time, y'all know what to do. Peace.